Hi, and welcome back to Military Law Talks. So, if you've been watching my channel, you know that I've been following the transgender troop ban. So, essentially, the DoD has reinstated from back the first Trump administration that gender dysphoria is medically disqualifying. And so, essentially, in essence, that bans openly transgender or if they've had any sort of gender dysphoria diagnosis or gender transition from serving in the military and assessing into the military. And so, of course, there's been multiple lawsuits. And so currently there's an injunction in place. But, well, let's get into it. Okay, so on May 6, 2025, the US Supreme Court entered in an order, which some refer to as like their shadow docket. So they're actually, it's kind of hard to find these orders. They're not actual opinions from the court. You have to go to the Supreme Court website and then go to the orders of the court. And it's literally like it's not named or anything. It's just like listed as miscellaneous order and the date. And so this was issued on Tuesday, May 6th. And it's an order in this case, United States versus Schilling. And this is one of the cases that is challenging the latest Trump administration barring of service members with gender dysphoria from service, essentially arguing, stating that it's medically disqualifying. And so this says that the stay is granted, which means that there's a preliminary injunction that was entered in this case in the Western District of Washington. And that preliminary injunction is now stayed. And so the Supreme Court is staying that injunction while the appeals play out. And so this case is currently being appealed in the Ninth Circuit on that issue of that preliminary injunction. And ultimately, the case will be decided at the district court level and then potentially appealed to the Ninth Circuit and then maybe the US Supreme Court. And so, but it does say that it's going to stay that injunction until there's a petition for a writ of certiorari, which means they're going to petition, if they petition the US Supreme Court for relief. And then it says if certiorari is denied, the stay will terminate automatically. And if the stay is granted, it'll continue until there's an opinion from this court. And so what does that mean? That means that that preliminary injunction is no longer in effect. And that was a nationwide preliminary injunction stopping the DoD from taking any action in regards to service members or service individuals trying to assess into the military with gender dysphoria. But that's not the whole story. So I'm going to share my screen again. Let me pull this down. And so there's a couple news stories that I wanted to share. And so let's look at those. Okay, so when the Supreme Court issued this order, this was a headline that I saw all throughout social media saying Supreme Court allows Trump to ban transgender people from the military. And so this article is from SCOTUS blog, and it just goes and explains what happened in the US Supreme Court. It explains that order that I just went over. It also explains kind of the history of these cases. And so it goes and explains this. However, it leaves out really important information. So it talks about the case and it talks about this one particular case, but what it leaves out is that there's other cases. And so if you've watched my channel, you know that there's other cases because I've gone over those other cases. So there's the Talbot case pending in the DC circuit, and then there's another case with an injunction that only applies to those service members part of that lawsuit those are both pending. And so I had to switch over to another article to get really the full story. And so this is an article that was put out, and it says LGBTQ group legal or plus legal groups ask judge to block trans military ban. And this is one of the only articles that I could find that gives the full story. And so here's the full story. So yes, that injunction in the Schilling case was stayed. However, there's still another injunction out there. Well, technically two, but one other nationwide injunction. And so this article says, but the first injunction in Talbot versus Trump, issued by the DC Circuit Court of Appeals, remains legally untouched. And in that case, a federal judge ruled that the government's argument for barring transgendered service members was ripe with, quote, unadulterated animus. And that is the case that I've gone over extensively in previous videos. And so it explains that while the Supreme Court issued that stay in one case, there's still an appeal to this injunction in the DC Circuit, the DC Appellate Court, and that is still pending. And so there's been briefing and arguments this week. Now, and the article does point out that because the Supreme Court stayed this injunction in one case, likely that the other circuits should follow the Supreme Court and stay this injunction as well to allow essentially the policy to take effect. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen, particularly when it comes to the DC Circuit, which has shown to be pretty unfavorable to the Trump administration, and it's really going to depend on what panel of judges. So House appeals at the circuit court or at the circuit court level, it's a panel of 3 judges. Usually there's anywhere between, I don't know, like 9 to like 20 some judges on the circuit, depending on the size of the circuit. And then it's just, well, should be luck of the draw. Not really sure how they choose the judges, but then you get a panel of 3, and it should be at random. And so it'll really depend on that panel of 3. But then again, if it goes all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, then the U.S. Supreme Court should rule, the same way that they did. And potentially then it would be allowed to take effect. But like I said, I felt like these articles, or at least the headlines on social media, weren't telling the whole story. The whole story is that while this has been stayed in one case, it really didn't change anything for the military. The military still is operating under that other nationwide injunction. So the DoD policy is still kind of at a standstill. There's still status quo, just like essentially under the Biden administration. So transgender individuals can still serve, and they're not going to be forced to either voluntarily or involuntarily separate from the military while these court cases play out. And so I just wanted to provide the full story, the full background. And so I'll be watching that other case. So it's currently in the DC Circuit. I would expect potentially an opinion in the next week or so. And so I will definitely be making a video when that comes out. So if you like this content, please hit the like button, share this content out there, and subscribe to my channel. I'm a new channel. Help me grow. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll catch you in the next one.